Hi everyone, it's Carrie from the Wilderness Center. Thank you for joining me for your Wild Classroom Soil Unit. This is lesson number 3, Soil and its Parts. So if you have been following along all from the very beginning, you know that soil is a mixture of 4 different things: rocks, organic material, air, and water. In the last lesson, we talked about what happens if there's not enough air or there's too much water. Uh, but in this lesson, we're going to talk about the rocks. So rocks make up about 45% of soil usually, but it's not like there's a big chunk of rock in there, right? I mean, you guys have all seen soil, you've studied it by now. Did you see a big chunk of rock in there? No. So when we talk about rocks, we're talking about tiny, tiny rocks, and they're different sizes that they have. So these sizes of rocks that are in your soil, geologists and soil scientists give them size names. So these are names of sizes, not necessarily what they're made out of. So the biggest size is gravel. That's pretty big. I mean, not huge, but think about things that are bigger than a grain of sand. So if you've ever played in a sandbox or gone to the beach, maybe you've picked up sand and watched it all come through your fingers, you can feel it with your fingers. Anything bigger than that, we call gravel. We're not going to worry too much about gravel because we want to talk about the 3 other sizes: sand, silt, and clay. And you can see, I mean, you probably all have touched sand before. You probably have felt silt and clay as well, but looking at your screen, how much smaller is silt than sand? And how much smaller is clay than either of those 2 things? You can't even see it. I couldn't even put it on this slide. It's so tiny. All right? So that's what we're talking about, particle size inside your soil. Like I said, gravel's the big stuff. We're not going to worry about that. We're going to be talking about the other ones, like sand. So here's a picture of sand at a beach. And if I want you to look at it closely, and I want you to see all the different colors. So sand is made up of a bunch of different minerals. We call it sand because it's, like I said, it's all that one size. So if you have a piece of soil that you want to check for sand, you can feel it with your fingers. So sand is something where you can rub it between your fingers and feel the individual grains. Okay. That's sand. The silt-sized particles are, remember, much, much smaller than the sand. So if you rub it between your fingers, you might not feel it. But if you have very clean hands, you can really try to feel it. You could try to rub it on a sensitive part of your body, like maybe your cheek, because this is a little bit more sensitive than your fingertips because they get kind of rough. Maybe rub a little bit on your cheek to see if maybe you feel teeny tiny grains of silt. And then the smallest of them all is clay. And clay, when it's wet, feels really slippery between your hands. So maybe if you've ever done pottery, you've worked with clay, so you would know what it feels like. We use it to mold and shape and make pottery and things like that. Clay is also something that dries. So if you see something like that looks like on your screen that has lots of cracks in it, that typically is some clay soil. So we're going to be figuring out during this lesson and the experiments that you're going to be doing and activities, the difference between those types of those sizes of particles in the sample of soil that you collected. Now, if this is the same sample from your lesson 2, awesome. If not, go ahead and get a new one. And we're going to do that by making something called a shake jar. So I'm going to actually flip to another video and show you exactly how to make a shake jar.
It's kind of fun. All you need is a clear jar with a lid, some water, soil, and time. Let's see how to do it.
Fill your jar up 1/3 full with the soil of your choice. Then add water until it is 2/3 full. Then make sure the cap is on really tight and shake it for at least 30 seconds. Next, set it down on a place where it can stay for a day or so undisturbed. And now the hardest part. Don't touch it! In a minute's time, the largest pieces of rock, the sand-sized pieces, will settle to the bottom. In about an hour, the smaller silt will settle. After 24 hours of sitting, the clay will settle out to the bottom. And all that stuff, that's just the rocks in your soil. What about the stuff that's floating on the top? That's your organic material, the good stuff. All right, so after you make your shake jar and you let it sit for a really long time, and don't touch it, that's the hard part, you're going to be finding some different layers in your soil. The first thing that's going to settle out is going to be your sand. It's the biggest, it's the heaviest, so that's going to sink to the bottom first. Within a minute, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. After about an hour, the silt should start to settle out. Okay, that's smaller. And then after 24 hours or even longer, the clay will settle out. So I would suggest that if you do this experiment, start to measure it, measure it in an hour, measure it in a day, leave it sit for a few days if you can, and see how different it looks. So on your screen here, we're going to be trying to find some different layers within your shake jar. This is going to be hard, so use your best judgment when you go through this. So A is going to be the bottom of your jar, and B is going to be the top of your sand. So maybe after when you go to look at it and you measure in about, we'll say 10 minutes or so, measure that amount that has come out. That's going to be your sand. Then you're going to need to wait longer for your silt and then your clay. So if you can look at the screen, I have some what I think are the correct layers marked. A is obviously the bottom, B is the top of the sand. There's going to maybe be a color change between the silt size and the sand size particles. The clay size particles, again, look for another color change, look for a texture change. Now this jar on the screen here is one that was sitting for quite a while, so that's why it looks a little bit gunky, and you can even see some green things floating on the top. Those green things that's the organic matter. So those were pieces of plants and dead broken up leaves and other things that may have been in the soil. So just use your best judgment when you go to find all of these layers. You are going to be doing some scientific work in this lesson as well. And I just want to talk really quickly and remind you again about what a hypothesis is. So this is the scientific process here. We're going to start with asking a question, and then you do some background research. You kind of learn a little bit about what you're doing before you make a hypothesis. And a hypothesis is a very educated guess based on the stuff that you already know. So once you have your hypothesis, then you test it. If it was good, then hey, let's report our results. If not, well, maybe let's figure out why we were wrong and maybe try a different hypothesis and try again. Science is really cool. You get to answer your own questions. All right, so as always, when you're outside collecting samples and things like that, please be careful, learn something, and have fun. Thanks for joining me for lesson 3. We'll see you guys next week.